In some parts, after the cutting, they have to sew you up. And when they sew you up, the day for your wedding, they hand over a knife to your husband. And that husband has the responsibility to cut you open before having sex with you.
This practice is enclosed within something as well-known, widely accepted as the secret society. It makes it even more complex to talk about and advocate for a complete ban.
We must start interrogating what is cultural beliefs and values and practice for us. Rites of passage, it means you've reached a stage where you're approaching adulthood. When it becomes a situation where a 1-month-old baby is being put through that process, it's no longer a rite of passage. It's a violation of rights.
There are women and girls who have gone through this without any issues, and there are those who have not just the physical scars, but also emotional, mental scars from this.
Women and girls, where they experience the problem, we have to take the lead on solving the problem. And the only way we do that is when, one, we educate ourselves, we're able to name that this is violence. Once we're able to name that, we start working out what's the framework to protect us.
Welcome to Honestly Speaking, the podcast where we have honest conversations about the issues shaping our lives. I'm your host, Antonia Howard, and today we're talking about a subject that sits at the intersection of culture, womanhood, identity, and human rights. That's female genital cutting or circumcision or mutilation, whichever you choose to call it. Which is the removal of all or part of the external female genitalia. That includes the clitoris, the hood of the clitoris, all or part of it, the labia, minora, majora. In different parts of the world, it is practiced very differently. And in Sierra Leone, it is understood by many as a rite of passage, a marker of belonging, respectability, womanhood, something done not out of cruelty, but out of love, part of our customs and traditions. And it is used to prepare girls for womanhood, to welcome girls into womanhood, and also acceptance, to give girls acceptance in their communities. FGM is also often spoken about in maybe whispers. It's also protected by silence because in Sierra Leone it happens within the secret society for women and girls. And so there is some amount of secrecy. But through years of advocacy, progress has been made, which is why I'm able to sit here and have this conversation. Even though this happens within a secret society, and for many it is a joyful occasion when they go through the rites of passage, but for many, FGM leaves physical, emotional, mental scars, and many women carry that quietly long after the ceremony ends. So today's question is, how do we honor culture while also protecting the bodies, dignity, future lives of women and girls? And my guest today is a feminist activist who has spent years advocating for the rights of women and girls, Ms. Josephine Kamara.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to Honestly Speaking.
Thank you for having me.
Always good to see you and lovely to have you on this conversation.
Great.
You've been doing this work for so many years, and I think the question I'd start with is, in Sierra Leone, why do you think um, FGM can be misunderstood? And I ask that because the advocacy against FGM to end the practice has been going on for some years. And perhaps as activists, as advocates for the rights of women and girls, there must be some frustration. We're talking about it, we're doing the work, we're educating people, we're educating young women and girls, why hasn't this stopped? So, what do you think is mostly misunderstood about the practice?
Um, Antonia, you're right. There is certainly frustration. I get to interface with a lot of survivor leaders, a lot of activists, human rights defenders, um, people who, somehow have, you know, built hope over time that this country will move away from practice that does not protect the dignity, the safety, and freedom of women and girls, especially because our leadership has, presented itself to be one of the most progressive in the history of this country when it comes to upholding rights of women and girls. The frustration comes from the fact that we spent months, but even before those months, we spent years since 2007 when the first Child Rights Act was passed in Parliament, before any amendments were called. I used to be one of those small kids that marched the streets of Freetown, very young then, that visited ministries, government agencies, that spoke with parliamentarians when I was part of the Children's Forum Network. And, just telling people about our rights and our responsibility. Children have the rights to education. We have the rights to freedom. We have the rights to identity, to, place to call home. Those different things that the United Nations Declaration of Children's Rights were talking about. The Child Rights Act was in 2007 passed into law in Sierra Leone, and children championed it. One of the things that were missing in that act is the fact that it was not explicit enough in languages that could, ban certain practices that are harmful for the growth, the integrity, the safety, and dignity for children. As it is, it's a very progressive act, but we must, if people are not following, must know that one particular reason why that act was, called for amendment, one of it was because it did not close the gap in ending child marriage. We used to have conflicting laws. Our The laws were conflicting when it comes to conversation about marriage, the age of consent, the age of getting married, who's supposed to be making that decision for children, and what does an appropriate marriage age should be for children. That gap, praise to all the people who worked on it, has been closed. Unfortunately, it wasn't closed at the time it was needed during the Child Rights Act. It was passed as a private member bill in Parliament, and it was passed separately. So people celebrated the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act.
Mhm.
Yes, we do celebrated it as activists, but for people who have done this work for years, it was a win, but you sabi with an unique. It was a win that if you protest it, it looked like you're not progressive. But then there were things to protest about it because it was part of the Child Rights Act. And we feel like if it was taken away from that Child Rights Act, then it leaves the Child Rights Act weakened. And there's a very important conversation that the Child Rights Act was meant to address, which is the banning of the practice of female genital cutting for children below the age of 18, children who cannot give consent for their body to be harmed or hurt, children that the state has the responsibility to look after. When you separate child marriage that is so deeply interwoven with the practice of female genital cutting, then it makes it very um, difficult to pass the Child Rights Act, where already people are contesting the practice of cutting as their cultural belief. So that alone was the frustration, is the frustration that we got a Child Rights Act, sustained a series of conversation about amendment in Parliament. In 2022, amendment conversation passed in Parliament. In 2024, another conversation because he did fail to explicitly ban the FGM. And then all of a sudden, with all the effort, all the campaign, all the consultation, all the position papers that were sent by activists, by groups, by women, by survivor leaders, people who have gone through the practice, who were deeply wounded by it, all of those position papers sent to Parliament. Parliament
Mm.
still went ahead, passed the Child Rights Act that intentionally removed the banning of FGM, and President, in his own wisdom also, signed a Child Rights Act that does not explicitly ban FGM. And it feels like you make one progress, like one foot forward and 10 feet, 10 foot
10 foot,
backward.
10 steps
Yeah,
backward.
10 step backward.
Mm,
And that backwardness is what has put us in this state of frustration. This fact that a state that have, positioned itself as champion for women and girls could, in its right senses, a parliament that was voted for the representation of our views could, in its right senses, sit and make a law that puts our girls back
mm.
in the front of hand.
I always approach this conversation with a lot of curiosity from both sides. From the sides of activists who are advocating or calling for an explicit ban, but also from the side of survivors. Some people don't even want to be called survivors because for them, they didn't survive anything. They went through the rites of passage. It was a beautiful ceremony, and they enjoyed every second of it. They enjoyed every bit of it. And the stories differ. There are women and girls who have gone through this without any issues, and there are those who have not just the physical scars, but also emotional, mental scars from this. So when you do this work, and you've worked with many survivors, in fact, I know of having worked at Purposeful that survivors lead a lot of the work that you do. Some survivors lead a lot of the campaigns that Purposeful does. What is misunderstood on that side? Because it takes a lot of work, first of all, for something that we embrace as culture, for something that we embrace as part of our identity, to then be looked at and named as violence.
Well, there's one thing which is the beauty of culture, which is us as a society have things we're identified by. There is another thing which is what has been declared a violation of human rights. There's one thing to be in an exclusive space where women exercise their power to be with each other, where intergenerational knowledge is passed on from the older generation to the younger generation, where girls get to experience what it feels like to transition from girlhood to womanhood. It's a beautiful thing. Rites of passage is exercised everywhere in the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be like the way we practice it. Like in some parts of the world, when children reach the age of 16, maybe they go for driving test. It's a rite of passage that you're now
Mhm.
at the
Approaching
approaching
adulthood. Yeah.
adulthood. You need to
You
pass the
get some
driving test. You
independence.
get some independence. You can now. In fact, some parents buy you a car, whatever. In some places, it's your parents giving you your first, glass of wine or your first shot. It's a rite of passage. In some places, you get the pass to go to the club, to go enjoy yourself. You are encouraged to bring a man home or girlfriend home. Just say, this is a person, this is a good friend of
To
mine. We're
introduce
watching.
your
Yeah,
partner.
this is a good friend of mine. We're watching each other. You're young,
Mhm.
but you're approaching adulthood and you get certain passage. Rites of passage is honored and respected everywhere in the world. It's a beautiful thing to do. When a rites of passage start violating human rights, that's where the contention is, because an all-female secret society that promotes rites of passage, female solidarity, movements with each other, bond and love and sisterhood and intergenerational knowledge sharing, it's a beautiful thing of itself. So that's why if you observe, anytime we talk about this issue, we're not talking about the institution where women go to be together. And
Mm.
that institution is the Bondo Society, for
Mhm.
example, in Sierra Leone. It's a beautiful institution. I've been in spaces where I worked on a film called the Bloodless Rite film, and I was in this community for 2 weeks, just observing the communal activities that were happening, the dance, the music, the beautiful experience that these young women were going through. Rites of passage, it means you've reached a stage where you're approaching adulthood. When it becomes a situation where a 1 month old baby is being put through that process, it's no longer a rite of passage. It's a violation of rights. When it becomes a situation where somebody who has not even reached the age of consent is being forced to go through something, it's no longer a rite of passage. It's violation of rights. The other important thing to notice is when it becomes a situation where bodily harm is being done, created, or perpetrated on someone, and a healthy organ is being cut, this is no longer a rite of passage. This is human rights violation. Female genital cutting is globally recognized as a human rights violation. That's a thing to note. A lot of people think, oh, now we culture and they can attack na salon thing. Most of these people don't know that this is a global crisis. A global crisis with over 2 million women and girls experiencing this practice of the cutting of the female genital area, the external genital area. Some, it's complete removal. Some, it's just the partial removal. Not a salon problem. Yes, it has been tied to cultural practice, but it's not a Sierra Leonean only problem. It's a problem deeply rooted in the region, but also practiced in diaspora from people going to Canada, the US, the UK, diaspora, how do you call it? The diaspora community practices. The cutting of our culture, this celebration of womanhood and female owning spaces existed way before the cutting. Sierra Leone did not initiate the cutting. That's another thing that people should understand. This is a practice that came from the northeastern part of Africa. Now, I make, in some cases, the worst form of female genital cutting is practiced in places like Sudan, in Somalia, in Ethiopia.
Do you think that is it possible that because this practice is enclosed within something as well known, widely accepted as the secret society, it makes it even more complex to talk about and advocate for a complete ban?
Yeah. It is even more complex to talk about. Many dynamics to that. One, now, woman issue. It's a female issue, and sometimes people feel like, why are they always discussing us? We're cutting which is also very important because the outer layer of the penis circumcision happen and they cut it, which
Yes.
is okay. This is not an healthy organ. This is not a healthy organ. This is just the outer layer of a foreskin. This is just the foreskin that we remove. But there's
For
still
male circumcision, yeah.
circumcision. But there's still some cultures, some places where they don't practice that. You understand? Um, that's one thing. That na woman issue. Why now we issue always and they can't talk about. And I also feel offended why always we have to use spectacle to discuss female issue. While always people who have not been through a certain experience don't have the lived experience of a woman sit and talk about woman issue. I also feel a little bit, you know, yeah, I protest that a little bit. There's also the conversation about yes, it is practiced through a female secret society. These are people they own thing where they don't embrace for years. This is what they've met people doing. But what probably they didn't know is this migrated into our space. But our secret society existed way before that. And then there's another thing which is our politicians now started using this as an avenue to harvest votes. We go to a place, we don't give them education, we don't make alleviate the lives of the women there, we don't bring businesses. Oh, but yeah, we bring initiation of girls into a practice that make them fully become women. Uh, Ideology, not like physically, ideally. Um, and then for a community where, for example, there is no school there is no form of social activity there happening there for women and girls. This is the only place they socialize. And I'm not talking Freetown because, when you talk about this and you just have Freetown in context, you miss the point. Freetown is not Sierra Leone. For deeply rural communities where the girls, when they reach certain age, they have to move from that community to a bigger town to go to school. Now, these are the places we're talking about, where the only social activities they have is when December come and it's time for initiation into secret society for their rites of passage. And that rites of passage is respected in such a way that if you've not gone through it, you will not find a husband to get married to. So this is why we were frustrated that these two things were separated when we were talking about passing a law in parliament. And we push for a private member bill rather than making sure that they're deeply interwoven, they must be moving together. In some places, if you're uncut, it's difficult for you to find a husband. They relate this cutting to purity. Like in some part of Africa, it shows that is a decent woman, and not do man businesses. And salon de practice just the common one. Like I make a try for make the context that this is global. In some parts, after the cutting, they have to sew you up. And when they sew you up, the day for your wedding, they hand over a knife to your husband. And that husband has the responsibility to cut you open before having sex with you. That's how deeply disturbing this situation is we're talking. That is not practice in Sierra Leone, but that's practice in Sudan, in Somalia, in Ethiopia, for example. Um, so that conversation of purity, of na virgin wey dem marry am is important, deeply practiced within the Fula community also. Um, then there's also this conversation of the clitoris is unclean. It's not clean, which is very disturbing because every part of the woman's body, in fact, that's the only place that self-cleans itself. It's a clean area. It's clean. Nothing is wrong with your clitoris. And the clitoris is not always beautiful. There are different shapes and size of it, different colors of it. So we must um, understand that and embrace it as it is. And then there's also a bigger conversation, which is the control of female sexuality. That because you have clitoris, you become, your sexual urges heighten and you become promiscuous. It is normal. The clitoris is a sexual organ. It enhances your sexual pleasure. That is why it is there. That's why it's disturbing for you to cut it. And again, let's not get it wrong. I'm not saying people who don't have it do not enjoy sex. That's not what I'm talking about because I'm just talking about it plays its own role. There are people who don't get stimulated with their clitoris are not there. There are people who have to do deep penetration for them to, be pleasured and all of that. It's such an important thing that because we so want to control female sexuality, we don't want a situation, we don't want to start thinking of our girls as sexually active people, of young women as sexually active people. We have this belief that you must be virgin before you get married. So to contain that, to suppress that, we have to subject them through. So there are many dynamics to it that is not just the part that we're embracing culture. And so these are the things that is making it so difficult to solve. It's not just the fact that it is being perpetrated through our all-female secret society, but it's because there are other social things affiliated to it, like the promiscuity thing, the other thing like, oh, it's not clean, it doesn't look beautiful, we have to make it enhance, and the conversation about controlling sexuality, and also politicians using it to harvest votes.
Yes, absolutely. There are different facets to the arguments and to the advocacy.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find to be maybe dwindling the effects of the advocacy in Sierra Leone is, some activists are calling for a complete ban, 100%, whilst others want to keep it to the age of consent. So if I'm 18 years old, I have reached the age of consent, I can choose. I want to be a member of the secret society and I want to be cut. I want to be circumcised. Um, while some activists do not agree with that, many think, you know, this is a harmful practice. It's not adding anything to the health or well being of women and girls. It needs to go 100%. Where do you stand on that?
In my early days of my advocacy and I'm a feminist activist, so choice is a very big part of my conversation as an activist. In those early days, I used to believe that, well, it's supposed to be women's choice. They must defend. That's the most feminist thing to do. But remember when I started, I talked about what is human rights violation. When something is being recognized globally, it's not a salon problem. Something is being recognized globally as a violation of women's rights, as a human rights violation. Something as deeply problematic that 2 million people, women and girls, have to go through it. In Sierra Leone, the stats is saying 83% of women and girls between the ages of 14 to 45 have already been caught. It means, say, if 10 of us are gathered here, at least 8 of us have experienced female genital cutting.
But some people would even question who makes these rules. Me, I go, I mean, I question that all the time. Who makes these rules? How do we conclude that this is a human rights violation? It brings me back to the conversation about corporal punishment
Yes.
and, flogging in schools, beating, child abuse, where in many African societies, parents discipline their children, not even parents, because we can say in Africa, the child is raised by the village. The village get the right for discipline the pikin. Can give you 6 cuts, 1 slap, 2 kick go before.
Doesn't make it right.
Yes, exactly. So that's the conversation that needs to be had, right? Like, so who determines what is a violation and how do we understand that within our own context?
Yeah. So just because we're in Africa and parents in Middleland forbid them picking and to kick one box, I used to threaten my younger siblings. I never hit them, but I threaten. I go put slap middle your face. They were always terrorized by that. It doesn't make it right. It's the same thing when something is inflicting bodily harm. Nobody in a right senses where you tell say, would they carry you go outside? Would they go fetch you, put you down, open your foot to use blade and cut you? And then when we don't cut you, there's possibility that we might use the same instrument to cut other girls. And there is possibility for disease to be spread through that. There's possibility that we're not trained people, we're not qualified to do that practice. We're not a medical doctor then. You might lose blood and it must cause some death in that process. There's possibility that even if you not die, even if you not lose blood, the scar that this has created. Because another thing that the clitoris does when you're pregnant and you're trying to have baby, it opens up and it creates way for the baby to pass. Even if that does not happen, you don't die, you not get sickness, you not bleed, but then the scar, the area heal. If it was a brutal like cut in the area heal, and then you have to go through childbirth and you have a traumatic childbirth experience. Again, not a lot of people experience it, but the data of fistula, for example, women getting fistula during childbirth, after childbirth, um, women experiencing childbirth complication, it's still high. Salone, as I speak, has one of the highest rates of paternal mortality. And I know we are celebrating the fact that this is dropping, it's reducing, but we are still among the top 10 countries. We've not moved away from that. And what we're not doing, we're not interrogating how all of these practices contributes to that. So anybody in our right senses, one should explain these things. So there's something called informed consent. You don't just tell people you have choice, you can decide what you want to do. You have to give them information. Tell them, what does this choice mean? What is at stake here? What is tend to be protected? Anybody where you not give informed consent, you don't promote choice like that too. And anybody, because they have to know what they're choosing. Whoever has that information, and then you say, oh, go yonder. If you like where you get picking a fire make you put you want make you put your hand, then you show them, you put your hand, you make us a born. You know they go enough, you know go near the fire day. You know go near this. So in this space, we don't do informed consent. We don't talk to people about what's at stake. And most importantly, when we say something is human rights, not so they're not just wait man, they're not just go sit on rights, and not to wait man. We are part of the United Nations. We're part of the Maputo Protocol. We're part of the African Union, African Commission. Like we're part of spaces where we sit and we say, this is what is right, this is what is wrong. WHO said this. This is what we must honor. And then our country go forward and we sign some of these protocols. We sign some of these treaties. We are saying we consent to this. Then apart from all of that, harm is just harm. When something is wrong, is wrong. When it's degrading for people, it's wrong. When it creates harm for person, it's wrong. That you don't need to go to school to understand. Human rights is the innate right that people are born with. They are born with this right. They have it. Whether they know it or not, they are born knowing that they have the right to freedom, the right to identity, the right to justice. Whether they know it or not, there is human rights declaration that people know they have. The rights to education. Remember when we started the pregnant girls' rights to school, a lot of people are like, why are you having this conversation? Then pregnant woman, you're calling picking woman. Then pregnant woman, and they can't scatter now with school and all of that. The fact of the matter, whether they're pregnant or not, sick or not, married or not, every child has the right to education. It's a human right. So whether you know am or not, we need for make you know am. And where you don't know am, then we need to have conversation about how to
That
make
was
you know.
also a very interesting time in Sierra Leone because I think for a second, for a good number of years, we forgot that these are children
Yeah.
and they haven't reached the age of consent to any sexual activity, whether not peer to peer,
Yeah.
whether it's an older person, any sexual activity
Yeah.
is abuse,
Yes.
it's rape
Yeah.
because these are children, bottom line.
Yeah.
And we have this conversation all the time when something happens, especially with girls. There's this question about, oh, they know it and they do, they know it and they do. At the end of the day, whether they know what they're doing or not, you as the adult, where you don't get more experience on earth past the picking, you are supposed to know what is right and what is wrong.
And it brings me to the state. The state has a responsibility to uphold rights. You, the state, now you don't go sign them and put to protocol, then see that, then this, that. You've signed on to these protocols, these treaties. So the state has a responsibility to make laws that protect, not hide behind, oh, now this now, wait till we meet with people and they do. What does a state have to do? A state have to uphold the rights and dignity of its people, you know. So it give me to that point, it bring me to that point of we have the state is failing us as women and girls, the state is failing this country. Well,
And as you know, as you talk about the state, Sierra Leone has been compelled now by the ECOWAS court. If you're listening and you're not aware of the matter, there was a matter um, on FGM against the state, against Sierra Leone, led by a survivor, Khadija, and supported by AIM, the Forum Against Harmful Practices, FAP, and supported by Purposeful as well. And the matter went to the ECOWAS court, and the ECOWAS court ruled on the side of the survivor, and the state owes her some compensation. And one of the recommendations was also that Sierra Leone passes a law.
it was not even a recommendation, not an order.
Well,
The
well,
ECOWAS
you can explain and talk about that a bit more. Yeah.
So for people who are not fully aware about this, and when we they talk and then they say, "Oh, no, so it's not problematic," as they make it sound, and we don't move from the fact that yes, it's not global issue, not a salon problem, and we're not here attacking people's cultural beliefs and values. We're just here talking about human rights violation. There are a group of people that weaponize this practice. In the case of Khadija, an uncut woman, had an argument with somebody where they call society woman, now in community. And you know how these people get? You're not supposed to talk back. You're not supposed to eat. You're not supposed. I feel like now we own way of putting law and order in the community among women, but we don't tie them inside the society. But so what happened was she had an argument with someone. They exchanged words. The matter was taken to a big woman in the community, an elder in the community, who was supposed to mediate. But then they realized that, oh, you were not caught, now they can't talk to this woman, when a society woman. And she was adopted, and then she was forcefully caught. And she survived one of the worst experience and form of cutting. They have to run away with them, get for flee the country and go to the neighboring country. And whenever you have the opportunity to, get her on the show, it would be nice for you to get a first-hand interview and experience of her being shared of our time. Khadija's story is not an isolated story. Before Khadija, we've experienced, we've seen people, because they're fed with somebody we go society, they hold them by force, then cut them. Apart from that day, you get picking the way can go na them village for holiday, then play, enter inside bush. They say, you not be supposed to enter this bush here. They hold them, then cut them. Nobody talks about that. We've seen that in Kenya, we've seen that in Cambia. In fact, picking and the way die where the matter still they on. Now domestic matters still they on for them. And there was a situation that the Minister of Gender narrated to me, because what we did was we moved with Khadija to all of the line ministries, people who we think should supposed to be taking action, informing our leadership about this ruling. And she recounted a story when she was still in the media space. She said about a 40-year-old woman in 10-year-old Peking gets arguments for water no water with somebody we don't go through the society. They argued and all of that. Then go hold the Peking, then cut them. When in mama go find out this mommy was for about 40 years old and she has already gone through the society, the cutting and all of that. They all am and they cut her back. So we've had a series of these incidents happening over time. But because the states have failed to put in laws that could criminalize this practice, that could ban it completely, and banning does not mean he will end. That's another conversation for another day. But at least the state's responsibility is to make the law exist. And then we start talking about, okay, how do we make this law in existence work in practice? You know, because there's a situation in the Gambia, for example, when the law exists, the ban FGM was still the cutting of children is happening. And in fact, the most recent case was the cutting of a 1-month-old baby. The BBC media spent a whole month reporting about that. So in that situation, Khadija came to Purposeful. The lawyer she was speaking to brought her to Purposeful. And we got the firm Against Harmful Practices involved because this is a group of over 50 organizations doing anti-FGM work or anti-FGC work. And we decided to support Khadija to go to court. We were going to court to challenge governments in failing. And a lot of people are like, oh, purposeful, then go court and then grab the person, the organization where go court, you know, make information minister, blah, blah, blah. They get, has a lot of things to say. It still does not erase the fact that the state has wronged not just one person, but thousands of girls and young women in this country. We say 83% of girls and young women have been caught in this country. The states have wronged them by not putting in law something that could criminalize this practice, especially when we don't sign to international treaties. Then we say this not discriminatory practice, this not degrading practice, this not practice will cause bodily harm to woman and girl
Mm.
picking them. And when we go to courts, now the ECOWAS court, we got our day in courts. We had a brilliant lawyer who represented us in court, but they were like a host of other lawyers, you know, preparing an argument, making applications, doing all of that. We won. Khadija won, this brave woman, and I'm not romanticizing her bravery because it's a painful experience having to relive. Just last September, she marked 9 years fighting for justice, 9 years of her life being disrupted, 9 years of her fleeing her home in Kenema, never able to go back home, 9 years of her leaving a child behind that she never built a relationship with, 9 years of reliving that trauma over again. And the police could not help her, the states could not help her. She was bold enough to come forward, and we took that matter to the ECOWAS. And the ECOWAS say, Salon for compensator, 30,000 US dollars, small money. They able compensate for the harm, I don't narrate the things where she had to experience, right? It would not erase those things. It's not going to give her a clitoris back. But they say for our trouble, compensate at 30,000. We've not had anything from government, not publicly recognizing this ruling, not saying anything in recognition of it, not even calling um, Khadija to have conversation about negotiation. And I know the lawyers are behind the scene negotiating with the Attorney General's office, but still, activists are saying we've not heard anything. The other thing where the ECOWAS court say, they say Salon for put in legislative process inside legal document inside the legislation of this country for ban FGM. This ruling come right in time when we were still discussing how the Child Rights Act they fail for criminalize FGM. How Parliament passed a Child Rights Act that did not explicitly name FGM. There's a Article 19 we talk about degrading treatment, harmful practices, and they were classifying the harmful practices. They did not classify FGM. And the argument is if you do not put female genital cutting as an harmful practice, then it's going to make people think this is cultural. There is nothing harmful about our culture. Our culture is beautiful as it is.
Mm.
And worst of it, Parliament, during that same period, where they don't pull the Child Rights Act that failed to explicitly ban FGM. And a lot of activists and media personalities, including yourself, Antonia, we're celebrating the fact that it has Section 19 that says it will criminalize degrading treatment, injurious practice on women and on children.
Children, yeah.
Parliament come back with a press release. And this press release say, we not criminalize FGM. We not put a fine on FGM. This bill or this act is not to address FGM. This press release was explicit. And some people and they say, oh, the clerk na parliament just rush and pull, no to parliament for interpret the law. Parliament makes the law, but not to parliament for interpret. That's how some of the landed politicians, this is the language they're using. But if I don't know too much about lawmaking, but I'm an advocate, right?
There's intent.
Yeah.
There is intent. If the intention was to include FGM in the harmful practices, then there would be no issue if people are interpreting it under that broad umbrella.
If the press release don't state the legislative intent that this legislation was not meant to address this issue, then why are we saying, oh, they don't know what they say? They just state their intent to us. But apparently the Human Rights Commission said they're going to court. We intend to work with them to go to court, to the Supreme Court, for make we ask for interpretation.
But is the law really the priority? What would you say? Now the law go come first rather than our cultural approach, our behavior, and just generally how we think about the practice. Which comes first, in your opinion?
It's not a matter of which comes first. It's a matter of these things can be done in parallel. They can be done complementing each other. What thing we for know is this is decades of advocacy. Before me and you, Antonia, were born, there were people moving this notion that there is the FG, female genital cutting, is an harmful practice. We met this advocacy. You make it clear in your intro that before now we could not even sit here and talk. It shows that a series of work have happened behind the scene to give us the mandate to be able to sit and discuss something that was deeply considered as a taboo conversation in this space. Before now, you could not find a survivor that will come forward and say, I am going to court, and went to court to challenge the government. Now, government court, no, it say government failed for protect me. Before now, that would not happen. Before now, we could not even stream documentary about the practice of female genital cutting and help people understand their harm. Before now, we did not get survivors at the forefront, but survivors are leading this campaign. There's a groundswell happening in communities. But what could make it much easier is when the states make a stance. And what the state is saying with all this thing that has happened with the Child Rights Act is, yes, we recognize, because cabinet did recognize, they did push, the Ministry of Gender and Children did push that, and the parliament debated and removed that. What they will say is, we don't make the law, the parliament make law. That's what they will say. But we've seen when the president sat and declared a state of emergency on rape and sexual penetration in this country, on sexual abuse, we saw what that did. It immediately triggered an amendment on the Sexual Offences Act, which is now a law. And right now, we see the Ministry of Justice talking about review of that act, because definitely there were things we were discussing 3-4 years ago that that was not taken in cognizance. For example, technology facilitated abuse.
Yeah.
And this all 16 days of activism was talking about the abuse that women and girls face through the digital world.
Yeah.
So yes, it's involved reviewing. So making a law is the first thing. It's not the end goal. It's not the final one. That's why I make mention of the Gambia. The law exists, but there's still supposed to be work.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I asked the question, because you can have the law, as we've seen, this not to new thing Nasalon. You can have a law, you can have legislation, you can have a policy, but if the mindset or approach or culture or belief around that subject doesn't change, In fact, you mentioned rape and sexual penetration, where we now have a law.
Mhm.
We have a law that addresses this very succinctly, even though it's now being amended. But then the practice, the culture, the approach, the rape culture still exists, and it is still a conversation that needs to be had.
But it still gives us a framework through which we can prosecute. That framework is what the law does. If a state make a stance against FGM, yeah, maybe we don't miss an opportunity with the Child Rights Act, but we can still push this as a separate bill.
Mhm.
We can still honor the ECOWAS ruling. And the most important thing for notice, we president is the sitting chair to the ECOWAS.
I was just about to mention that. I mean, all of this is very unusual. Unusual for you have the head of state, you have the president of Sierra Leone sitting as the chair of ECOWAS and not reacting to a ruling that has come for the state to act upon, for his state to act upon. What channels have you used to reach the chair
I
of
mean, they
ECOWAS?
will. I mean, they will say when ECOWAS make a ruling, the first respondent is the Ministry of Justice. We've reached that channel, um, and that's true. The Ministry of Justice is supposed to be advising the president on things like this.
Mhm.
We've reached that channel. We've had our day with the Minister of Justice. We've had conversation, and just to give it to him, he is completely in line with this ruling. He see this as harm, as torture, as something we must recognize. He personally apologized to Khadija. Khadija felt seen. She felt hard. We've met with the Minister of Gender. The same thing. Khadija felt seen and felt hard. The president will say, I don't know what's in the president's mind, but the president will say, I did declare that my government will support the banning of FGM. And it did. We've seen that in statements that he's made. We've seen that through the cabinet's summary. We go now parliament. We the cabinet we make a stand, but parliament debated. And parliament, to be honest, not to one party no more did they. And in democracy, we discuss and debate things, and then we come to a level playing ground. But at the same time, we've seen our president make an executive decision to declare state of emergency. I feel like we can still, if we see the trauma, if we see the extent to which, and a lot of people are saying, well, it dropped from 90% to 83, it's still not something to celebrate. We can still make deliberate actions, efforts to protect our women, to make our women safe. And one of the thing that the president saying in his opening of parliament is say a state something around a state protecting its weak, like the mandate is for the states to protect its weak and make the weak powerful rather than protecting those who are already powerful.
Mhm.
That was not the exact, but the idea was around that.
Whilst we wait for um, the executive decision on this, and you
Well, we've seen the
explore.
executive decision because the president did sign the Child Rights Act.
Yes, it
While all
doesn't.
of these
It
debates
doesn't
will happen,
necessarily address the ruling
yes,
and
and
all the asks
yes,
that the
and the Child
ECOWAS
Rights
has
Act
put
was
in the
pending
ruling.
while the ruling was out. It was pending, waiting for president to ascend it while the ruling was out. So I think the president spoke clearly to us as women and girls of this country. He spoke clearly because it could have one decided not to sign it as it was, to send it back for review, but he signed it. So that was a statement without saying anything. That action was a clear statement to us.
So then, what's our role in this? What's our role as women and girls? Um, And I ask this based on the different views and approaches to female genital cutting in Sierra Leone. For people who are totally against the practice, those who think it is harmful, doesn't add any value to the lives of women and girls, and also for those who still believe it is part of our culture and identity. as Sierra Leoneans? What can we do?
One of our
Um,
biggest role is to educate ourselves, is to keep informing ourselves, is to keep ourselves woke. Um, a lot of the things that happen in this space, and speaking recently, like we sparked conversation again around the safe motherhood bill that is sitting in parliament for almost 18 months now. Nothing has happened since it was tabled last year, June. And we moved around in communities with the University of Sierra Leone. We did public lectures, and then we were doing street performances with the University Theatre Group for help young people understand within this bill wey dem don table for so long, wetin e tend for solve for woman and girl pikin dem. Things around obstetric violence, things around getting access to care when you're having babies or when you decide not to have one at all. All of these things. We realize that a lot of young people are not informed about the conversations happening in parliament and they want to keep it that way. When you start to talk, they tag you as, oh, opposition, oh, they represent this party, and I'm just an activist and I'm just naming things as they are. Young people, women and girls, where they experience the problem, we have to take the lead on solving the problem. And the only way we do that is when, one, we educate ourselves, we're able to name that this is violence, we're able to understand the history of this violence. Once we're able to name that, we start working out what's the framework to protect us. One of the framework is those community mobilization, which a lot of activists, a lot of survivors are driving. We have the Syrian Kamara, who is leading the keep the drum, lose the knife,
use the knife. Yeah.
celebrating culture, upholding culture, but let's drop the knives and the blade. We have Nene Aim Amazonia Initiative Movement. As I sit here, she just completed a bus tour in over 16 communities in the northern parts of Sierra Leone, helping people to understand the ruling. What's the ruling saying from the ECOWAS? What are we expecting governments to do in response to this ruling? Why the delay? And also help people to understand the harm associated with female genital cutting. There are others doing livelihood programs, others engaging writing position paper to parliament when parliament asked for one. Once we keep ourselves woke, conscientization, the idea of political education, educating ourselves. Now we don't keep that education to ourselves. I was listening to a podcast that says the speaker was saying your experiences, if you keep it to yourself, it doesn't serve anybody, it doesn't serve others. Your education, your experiences, your lived experiences, all of this you collate together. Lived experiences, experts' knowledge. Khadija sharing a story at the ECOWAS is experts' knowledge. You have to share that with the world. That's where public education, popular education happens. Once we share that publicly and more people come to a state where they are understanding this as violence, that, oh, WHO say this is human rights violation, that, oh, this complication I experience, it's affiliated to this. Does not necessarily mean all the time you will get a face or see that complication, but still the conversation of cutting a healthy organ for non-medical reason is still problematic. Once people are able to name that, then people join their voices, the people's action, people demands, asking their leaders for a change. Then it does not become a problem of, oh, now Western ideology, they come not in space. Like we not sabi waiting our rights, like we not sabi waiting they cause bodily harm to we. You understand? So once that groundswell is developed and a army of educated, and I'm not talking about formal education only, army of women and girls who have educated themselves about the crisis that they are facing, naming it as now demanding change from their MPs, from their governments, then it become the masses. Then it will be unimaginable for our leaders not to listen to us.
Mm.
And when election time comes, since then they bank on this for votes. Let we tell them say we know say this one na the car also for car initiate with pikin. Una big promise we school una no can build school. Why una no can build school una the car for can get our pikin them? We not reach 18 yet. We cannot consent for me them go inside bush for them go court them. Why didn't we build school? And I'm not saying the practice of our cultural rites of passage should not continue. I'm saying we must ask the right question. Just your cultural practice, not they make you go sit down in a parliament as MP representing your village. You understand? Just your cultural practice, not they take you na the UN for address issues and global issues. Just your cultural practice, not make you a medical doctor or lawyer. We want to raise women and girls who are educated enough to rule this country. And just this promotion of now we cultural practice and our girls are not getting educated. And worst of it, we're getting our girls out of school for make them go by initiation. And by the time they're done, now married and go married and they go back to school. It does not help us at this country. This is one of the reasons why gendered poverty is still here and why women and girls are supposed to be at the, poor end.
So then what does meaningful progress look like? We don't talk about, having the legislation. And we've seen we've seen an example from the Gambia, what having the legislation, but without necessarily changing cultural perceptions could look like.
Mhm.
In our own context, what could meaningful progress look like? Is it the law? Is it education? Is it a community? What does that look like
Well,
for
so
us?
there is the, how do you call it, the national strategy on the reduction of FGM and C. There's that strategy. It's been there since 2016 with the Ministry of Gender. And I'm sure Ministry of Gender started conversation again, consultation again around that. That is in recognition that the law itself does not end the practice, that people are supposed to be informed and that we're supposed to have a clear roadmap as to how we go reduce the practice. What the law does is it says the state is willing to stand behind us. But what the popular education does is it helps people to see the harm, how it relates and reflects in their national in their everyday life. It helps people to see how it reflects in their everyday life. And then most importantly, it helps build the groundswell. So that's why in the Gambia you will see the law exist, but because of things like national strategy, like a roadmap does not exist, people still practice it. That's why in Liberia you will see the roadmap exists. A president who has declared during the last hunger that in September, not too far ago, that is his pledge during that time is to ban FGM. He said it. There's political will. There is a proclamation from the president, but it has not translated immediately to law. This now for sure say not a one size fits all. Different approach supposed to be used at different level. So that's why at Purposeful we believe it can start from the community as well start high up there. That's why we don't believe in naming and blasting and cussing out our MPs because we need them. We believe in lobbying, conversation, dialogues. We believe in people understanding what is and how to move them from one state of belief to another state of belief, which uphold rights, dignity, and freedom of women and
Mm.
girls.
And how would that pan out? Because what the conversation is now, the question I'm asking is, how do we uphold culture? How do we recognize and uphold our culture, our beliefs, our tradition, whilst also protecting the lives and futures of girls and women?
We can start by interrogating culture. It's okay to ask. Why do we practice this? Oh, we meet with Mama, they practice our meet with, but why? But why? We have to be curious little children asking why. Why are we practicing this? And then if it's become, it's a form of our identity. But yes, what is in this form of identity that is not useful and helpful to us as women and girls? What affects the health and well-being and integrity of women and girls? Once we're able to name that, then it's okay to change. Culture is not static. It's the one thing that is not static. And there's another thing to allay people fear. There's alternative rites of passage where we can uphold our beautiful culture, our all-female solidarity spaces, where we can be in community with each other, where the older women can sit and pass on beautiful experiences. Like me young granny na be herbalist, be no herbal medicine, like she passed on with that. She didn't leave that to anybody because we were taught to believe that, oh, because we sabi about medicine, they are dangerous. They will go give medicine to pikin we go kill them. You understand? And we've seen how those medicines are very, very important in the health sector. There are conversations about how to make those people come back and support in medical procedures and all of that. We can have all of those beautiful things if only we embrace the beautiful side of our culture and not be afraid to name the side that creates harm.
Mm. Thank you very much, Jojo. I think this has been an interesting conversation. I hope that those who are listening to this, people who listen or watch, would learn a thing or two and would begin to think about this. Because for me, this is the most important thing, to challenge things that you so believe in, things that you hold dearly, and to be able to ask yourself, why does this happen? To not relinquish your curiosity because na so you can meet
Yeah.
it dey happen, or na so do use for do am. That doesn't create progress. It creates stagnation. So thank you so much for your time,
Thank you
Jojo.
so much for having me. Really, really
Right.
grateful.
Lovely having you. Don't forget to share this conversation, like, comment, and this is where we'll end this episode. We have been recording at Black Lion Production Studios, and I have been your host. My name is Antonia Howard. Until next time, bye. That's it for today's episode of Honestly Speaking. Thank you for listening and being a part of these important conversations. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, please like and share. And if you're feeling inspired, do leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. And of course, carry on the conversation online. Share your thoughts, experiences, and ideas using hashtag HonestlySpeakingSL. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay honest.